It's absolutely despicable. I mean, these kinds of crimes are cowardly, they're predatory, and they destroy lives. It's hard to fathom how anyone could behave this way, but we know they do. This isn't a new phenomenon in itself. We know that for decades there have been issues with drinks being spiked in nightclubs and bars and so on, but it's this sort of terrifying new twist whereby, as careful as someone might be with their drink, they now find there's a possibility that a man, and it's almost always going to be a man, will attempt to inject them and incapacitate them for sexual purposes. It's terrifying and disgusting in equal measure.
The idea that people are slipping drugs of whatever form into drinks, I mean that's one thing, and it's dreadful, and it's unthinkable, and it's all the things you just described. But to go the lengths of injecting people with whatever, what kind of scale are we talking about this happening on? Do we have a total for the number of people who've come forward and said this appears to have happened to them?
I think it's an ever-changing situation, but I think by virtue of this being reported in the media, other women have come forward from across the UK, and including a number of cities and towns in Scotland. So it is hard to quantify. Yeah.
And do we know via blood tests or anything else, has it been possible to demonstrate what it is that women have been injected with?
I don't think so at this stage. I saw some reports from cases that were reported elsewhere in the UK where it was found that there was no trace of substances, and I think that can be one of the difficulties, is that often the morning after, if as and when these are reported, quite often the substance can have left the body, left the bloodstream. Often, of course, we know there's under-reporting around this type of crime. Women and men, it's not always exclusively women, unfortunately, it happens to a lot of people. They often don't report it because there's a stigma, there's a sense of uncertainty. It may be if people have been out and consumed quite a lot to drink, or perhaps taken drugs, they are unsure about whether they've been targeted or not. They might know that, they might suspect that, but they don't quite know how to take that forward.
Apart from, obviously, if people find, a puncture wound or a wound of some sort that gives them something to go on, what other symptoms might women be looking out for, in the aftermath of a night that might lead them to believe that they too have been victims of an attack like this?
Well, I think we all know the difference between being drunk and being subject of a serious attack like this. The women who have spoken to the media, some of whom have waived their right to anonymity, which is to be applauded and admired, have described being extremely unwell, unable to walk, completely almost comatose, and not only are they subject to the risk of all sorts of horrific acts being conducted on them, how could anyone administer something like this without, running the very real risk that a person could die?
It's clearly it's yet more evidence of the absolute necessity for friends to stick together on nights out and ensure that, as far as possible, that they're making sure that each other gets home safely. But is there any other advice that the police or you or any other organisation might offer to help young women be more aware simply that this is happening?
Well, I agree that women and men need to look out for one another, and they do. But we have to be slightly careful we don't go down the route of putting it on the victims. The people who do this are responsible, entirely responsible. I mean, I would say to anyone watching this, if they know of anyone who talks about doing this, because clearly there's now an amount of planning that goes into these kind of attacks. I'm assuming, I've got nothing to back this up, that this is probably some kind of online subculture. I mean, we've heard of the incel movement. Just earlier this year, a young man in England shot dead 5 people and then himself, and he was a participant of this, or identified as one of these incel involuntary celibates, and deeply misogynistic, deeply troubled young men. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was a sort of overlap between that kind of subculture and those who are behind these kind of attacks. But yes, people should be extremely vigilant, not just people enjoying a night out, but taxi drivers, club owners, door staff, bar staff. We've all got a part to play here. And really, the law, the police and the criminal prosecution systems, both in Scotland and England, need to take this much, much more seriously.